The hallway stretched cold and endless beneath the Ministry of Magic. Footsteps echoed against stone walls, each sound swallowed by the weight of secrets pressing down from floors above. Rain drummed somewhere distant, muffled by layers of enchantment and earth. In the Department of Mysteries, the unspeakables moved through their work with practiced silence, robes sweeping across polished floors that reflected nothing but shadow. Tonight they gathered in the death chamber. The circular room waited in its usual stillness, stone benches rising in tiers around a sunken pit. At the center stood the archway. Tattered black veil hung within its frame, stirring though no wind touched it. The fabric moved as if breathing, as if alive with something beyond comprehension. 3 unspeakables checked their instruments. Bronze dials gleamed in wandlight. One adjusted a device that hummed with contained magic. Its purpose known only to those who'd signed away their names for the privilege of working here. They were not opening the veil. The protocols were clear on that point, written in blood and worse things. They sought only to measure its echoes, to map the boundary between what was and what should never be. The senior among them placed a containment sphere on the stone floor. Inside it, something writhed. Dark residue from a recent investigation collected at a crime scene where Death Eaters had struck and fled. The object had shown autonomous behavior. It had tried to speak, to reach, to influence those who came too close. Standard procedure demanded its study here, where the veil's presence might reveal its true nature. Standard procedure had not accounted for what the residue carried within it. The moment the sphere opened, the instrument screamed. Dials spun wildly. The hum became a shriek. Air in the chamber thinned as if a great lung had drawn breath. One unspeakable shouted something, words lost in the sudden pressure change. Another raised their wand, but magic here followed different rules, obeyed older laws. The veil tore. Not the fabric itself, but something behind it. Reality bent like glass under stress, and through the fracture came light that had no color, sound, that had no source. The senior unspeakable grabbed for the sphere, but the dark residue had already dissolved, its purpose fulfilled. Whatever it had been in life, whatever fragment of will had animated it, had wanted this, had planned for this. Space folded. The archway groaned, though it was only stone. And then he fell through. A man tall and lean, tumbling from nowhere into the chamber, as if the universe had simply decided he no longer belonged where he'd been. He hit the stone floor with less impact than he should have, already twisting mid-fall, already adjusting. White hair caught the wanlight. He landed in a crouch that spoke of reflex older than thought. The unspeakables drew wands as one. Spells flew before questions could form. Stunning hexes, binding curses, the full repertoire of those trained to contain first and understand later. The man straightened. His movements carried no urgency. The spells reached toward him and slowed. They crawled through air that had grown thick as honey, fighting distance that stretched and somehow never closed. One by one, they stopped, suspended in space like insects in amber, then faded to nothing. He wore dark clothing that didn't match any fashion from this world. High collar fitted jacket boots designed for purpose rather than ceremony. A strip of black cloth covered his face from nose to brow, obscuring what should have been eyes. Yet his head turned, tracking each unspeakable with precision that suggested he saw more than they did, more than anyone should. The senior unspeakable's wand arm trembled. Training said to call for backup. Instinct said to run. They did neither, frozen by the simple fact of what they'd witnessed. Magic didn't behave that way. Space didn't work like that. The man standing in their chamber shouldn't exist by any law they understood. He looked past them to the veil. His posture changed. The casual confidence that had marked his first moments drained away, replaced by something that might have been recognition or might have been horror. It was hard to tell with his face half hidden, but his body language spoke volumes. He took one step toward the archway, then stopped. "Don't," one of the unspeakables managed. Their voice cracked on the single word. The man glanced back. Even through the blindfold, they felt the weight of his attention. "This isn't a door," he said. His accent was foreign, his tone carrying an absolute certainty that brooked no argument. "This is a boundary between what is and what isn't." He turned back to the veil, and his voice dropped to something quieter, something that might have been respect or might have been grief. "You've built a monument to the edge of existence itself." Footsteps pounded in the hallway beyond. More unspeakables drawn by the alarms that were surely screaming throughout the department now. Aurors, too, their training put to use securing a breach that should have been impossible. The man heard them coming. He made no move to flee, no gesture of defense. He simply stood there, hands loose at his sides, watching the veil ripple and sway. The reinforcements burst through the entrance, wands leveled. Someone shouted for him to get down, to surrender, to explain himself. The man raised his hands slowly, a universal gesture of non-threat that nonetheless felt like indulgence rather than submission. As if he were humoring them, as if he could leave whenever he chose, and they all knew it. An Auror stepped forward, conjuring ropes that wrapped around the stranger's wrists. The bindings held. He didn't resist, but when they tried to pull him away from the veil, he set his feet and became immovable as a mountain. Not through struggle, simply through being. The Aurors pulled harder, the ropes went taut. The man didn't budge. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," he said, still watching the veil. "But I need to understand what this is before I go anywhere." They didn't listen. Of course they didn't. Fear makes poor counselor, and this was the Department of Mysteries where fear lived in the walls. Someone cast a more aggressive spell, something designed to force compliance. It reached the man and stopped joining the earlier attempts in that impossible space around him. He sighed, a sound of disappointment more than anger. Then he vanished. Not through apparition. The crack of displaced air never came. He simply stopped being in one place and started being in another. 10 feet to the left, the ropes falling empty to the floor. The Aurors spun spells flying, but he'd already moved again. Each time they targeted him, he was somewhere else, not running, but relocating treating distance as a suggestion rather than a rule. After the 5th displacement, he stopped, raised his hands again. "I said I'm not here to fight." His voice carried frustration, now the tone of someone dealing with an obstacle they found tedious rather than threatening. "I don't know how I got here. I don't know where here even is. But that thing," he gestured to the veil, "is dangerous in ways you don't understand. Leave it alone." An hour later, the chamber had been secured. The man sat on one of the stone benches, still bound, though the ropes meant nothing, surrounded by a dozen wands that meant even less. Senior ministry officials had arrived. They whispered in corners, arguing about protocols and procedures, while carefully not looking at the prisoner, who wasn't really a prisoner at all. The decision came down from the minister's office itself. The man was to be contained, studied, and above all kept secret. News of the breach could not reach the public. Not now, not with Voldemort's return still a point of heated denial. Not with the entire magical government skating on thin ice of their own making. Someone suggested Azkaban. The suggestion died quickly. Nobody wanted to imagine what this man might do if genuinely provoked. Nobody wanted to test whether Dementors could affect someone who treated the laws of magic as optional. Instead, they would use him. The decision made a certain cruel sense. If he was powerful, and he clearly was, then he could be pointed at their enemies. If he was dangerous, and nobody doubted that, then better to aim him at Death Eaters than leave him to his own devices. And if he proved uncontrollable, well, they had options. They had always had options. The cover story came together within the hour. A visiting specialist in defense against the dark arts brought in to consult on recent Death Eater activity. Hogwarts would serve as his residence, his classroom, a convenient way to observe him while appearing generous. Dumbledore would surely cooperate. The old man believed in second chances and rehabilitation and seeing the best in people. He would take this stranger in without question. They never asked the man's name. He offered it anyway, watching them scramble to take notes with that same sense of being humored. Gojo Satoru. The syllables meant nothing to anyone present, attached to no family, no history, no crime. A blank page in a book written in the wrong language. As they led him from the death chamber, he looked back one final time at the veil. His expression, what little showed around the blindfold, was unreadable, but his words carried clear across the stone. Someone tried to open that deliberately. Someone knew what it would do. The senior unspeakable who had begun this night's work said nothing. In their pocket, the reports on the dark residue waited to be filed. Reports that would note its unusual properties, its seeming intelligence, its almost purposeful behavior. Reports that would in time connect to other reports about objects and artifacts that acted with will beyond what magic should grant them. But that was for later. For now, they had a different problem. They had a man who walked through their strongest spells like morning mist, who spoke of boundaries and existence with the authority of someone who had seen both break. They had him contained in name only, and they had just decided to place him in a school full of children. The rain continued above, unaware and uncaring. In the death chamber, the veil swayed in its frame, stirred by nothing and everything. The instruments the unspeakables had brought lay scattered and broken, their readings lost to chaos and fear. Whatever they had meant to discover about the boundary between life and death would remain unknown, at least for tonight. Gojo Satoru stepped into the corridor, flanked by nervous aurors who held their wands too tight and walked too far away. He said nothing more. But as they guided him toward the lifts, toward the surface, toward a world he didn't know and a war he hadn't asked to join, his lips curved in something that might have been a smile. It was not a particularly reassuring expression. Hogwarts had changed. The castle still stood against the Scottish sky towers, reaching toward clouds that promised rain. Stone corridors still echoed with student footsteps. The great hall still filled with chatter at mealtimes. But something fundamental had shifted like a bone set wrong that ached with every movement. Educational Decree number 24 hung in the entrance hall. Parchment crisp and new. 23 waited beside it. 22 above that. They climbed the wall like infection, spreading through healthy tissue, each one signed in the same cramped hand, each one tightening the noose another inch. Harry Potter stood in the corridor, outside defense against the dark arts, watching students file past. Fifth years moved with hunched shoulders and careful steps as if the floor might report their weight to someone who cared. Younger students whispered when they thought no teachers could hear. Older students didn't whisper at all anymore. They'd learned. The door to the classroom stood open. Inside, Dolores Umbridge sat at her desk, arranging porcelain plates painted with cats. Each one had been positioned just so aligned with the precision of someone who believed order could be forced into existence through will alone. She wore pink again. She always wore pink, the color of something sweet turned rotten. "Enter," she called, though no one had knocked. Her voice carried that particular sweetness that made Harry's scar prickle with warning. "We have a guest today, a very special guest." The students filed in. Harry took his usual seat beside Ron, who looked as thrilled about another defense lesson as he might about a visit to the hospital wing. Hermione sat in front of them, quill already out, parchment already prepared. She'd learned to take notes even when there was nothing worth noting. Safer that way. Umbridge stood. Her smile widened. "Class, we are privileged today to have a visiting consultant join us. The ministry has graciously provided expertise in these troubled times." She gestured to the side of the room with a hand that dripped with rings. "Professor Gojo will be observing our lesson." The man leaning against the wall straightened. He was tall, impossibly so dressed in dark clothing that looked foreign and somehow dangerous despite its simplicity. Black fabric covered his face from nose to brow, obscuring what should have been his gaze. White hair caught the light from the windows. He'd been so still that half the class hadn't noticed him until Umbridge spoke his name. "Please," he said, his accent placing him nowhere. Harry recognized. "Just Gojo is fine." Umbridge's smile tightened. "Professor Gojo, as per ministry protocol." She turned back to the class, dismissing him with the ease of someone who believed titles granted control. Now, books out. Chapter 7. We will continue our study of defensive theory without the dangerous and irresponsible practical work that has characterized previous years. A hand rose. Hermione, of course. But professor without practice, Miss Granger. The sweetness in Umbridge's voice curdled. "Surely you of all students understand that the ministry-approved curriculum has been designed by experts far more qualified than any of us to determine what is safe and necessary." "Safe and useless," Ron muttered under his breath. Umbridge's head snapped toward him. Her smile never wavered. "Mr. Weasley, detention, tonight, my office." The man against the wall shifted. The movement was subtle, but Harry noticed. So did Hermione, her quill pausing mid-word. So did Umbridge, though she gave no sign of it beyond a slight stiffening of her spine. The lesson dragged on. Students read passages about theoretical countercurses. Umbridge circulated correcting posture and pronunciation with equal severity. The man called Gojo watched it all with an attention that felt heavier than simple observation. Twice, Harry caught himself glancing back, trying to understand what lay behind that blindfold. What kind of person would stand silent while students were denied the knowledge that might save their lives? Near the end of class, Dean Thomas raised his hand. "Professor Umbridge, with you-know-who back, shouldn't we be learning how to actually defend ourselves?" The temperature in the room dropped. Umbridge's smile remained fixed in place, like a mask carved from ice. "There is no you-know-who, Mr. Thomas. The ministry has been quite clear on this point. What we have are scare tactics and lies spread by those who would undermine proper authority." She moved closer to his desk, looming despite her short stature. "To suggest otherwise is to align yourself with those who would see our society torn apart by hysteria and rebellion." "But Dumbledore said," Headmaster Dumbledore, Umbridge cut in, "has been removed from several important positions due to his increasingly erratic behavior." I would not place too much faith in the words of a man who sees threats where none exist. Gojo spoke for the first time since the lesson began. "Interesting theory." His voice carried a casual tone that somehow made every word sound like a challenge. What happens when the threat he warned about shows up anyway? Every student turned to stare. Umbridge pivoted slowly, her smile stretching wider until it looked ready to crack her face in half. "I'm sorry, Professor Gojo, but I don't believe I invited commentary from observers." "You didn't," he agreed. "But you're telling children that the world is safe when it isn't. Seems worth mentioning." The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Umbridge's fingers curled around her wand, still tucked in her robes. Harry saw the movement. Hermione saw it. Ron, to his credit, was already half rising from his seat. Though what he planned to do against a teacher was anyone's guess. "Perhaps," Umbridge said, each word clipped with barely restrained fury, "you would like to demonstrate the practical application you seem to favor so highly." Gojo pushed off from the wall. He moved with an ease that suggested he'd been waiting for exactly this invitation. "Sure. Hit me with your best shot." Umbridge drew her wand. The movement was smooth, practiced, the gesture of someone who'd done this before and enjoyed it. She spoke a word Harry didn't recognize, probably some obscure spell from the restricted section. Red light lanced across the classroom. It never reached him. The spell slowed. Harry blinked, certain his mind was playing tricks, but no. The curse crawled through air that had grown thick as syrup, fighting distance that stretched and stretched. Students leaned forward in their seats. Hermione's quill dropped from nerveless fingers. The red light dimmed, faded, and finally dissolved like morning mist under sun. Gojo hadn't moved, hadn't raised a wand, hadn't even shifted his weight. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. Umbridge fired again. 3 spells this time. Different colors, different angles. They met the same fate as the first. The classroom had gone so quiet that Harry could hear his own heartbeat hammering against his ribs. "Fascinating, though," Gojo said. "Is that really the best the Ministry can do?" Umbridge's face had gone from pink to red to something approaching purple. Her wand trembled in her grip. For a moment, Harry thought she might try again, might keep throwing spell after spell until something worked or her magic ran dry. Instead, she lowered her arm, smiled that terrible smile, spoke in a voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Class dismissed. Early. How fortunate for you all." She turned to Gojo, and her next words carried across the room with crystal clarity. "Professor Gojo and I have administrative matters to discuss. In private." The students fled. They'd learned to recognize when adults were about to fight, and they'd learned that being present for such fights was dangerous. Harry hesitated at the door, looking back. Hermione grabbed his arm and pulled him through. Ron came last, glancing over his shoulder until the door swung shut. In the corridor, students scattered to their common rooms, or the library, or anywhere that wasn't here. Harry, Ron, and Hermione ducked into an alcove, the same one they'd used last year to avoid Filch. They pressed close to the stone, listening. Umbridge's voice came muffled through the door. "You have made a grave error today. Have I?" Gojo sounded amused. "Seems to me I just stood there. You undermined my authority in front of students. You contradicted ministry policy. You displayed abilities that you have not registered according to proper protocol." Papers rustled. "I have here the forms you will need to complete. Full disclosure of all magical capabilities. Signed agreement to abide by educational decrees. Acknowledgement that any breach of conduct will result in immediate removal." "And if I don't sign?" The silence stretched. When Umbridge spoke again, her voice had shed all pretense of sweetness. then you will find that Hogwarts can be a very uncomfortable place for those who refuse to cooperate. More silence. Then Gojo's voice, thoughtful now. You're not actually interested in my paperwork, are you? You want to know what I can do, so you can figure out how to control it. I want, Umbridge said, to ensure the safety of our students. Something you seemed quite cavalier about today. Right. Student safety. Is that why you're teaching them theory while Death Eaters are recruiting? There are no Death Eaters. Lord Voldemort is dead. The Ministry has confirmed this repeatedly. Keep telling yourself that. Footsteps moved toward the door. I'm not signing your forms. I'm not registering my abilities. And I'm not pretending the world is safe to make your job easier. The door slammed open. Gojo stepped out, and Harry pressed deeper into the alcove, certain they'd be spotted. But the man walked past without a glance, hands still in his pockets, whistling something tuneless under his breath. Umbridge appeared in the doorway. She watched him go with an expression that promised retribution. Then she turned and her gaze swept the corridor with predatory focus. Harry held his breath. Ron had gone very still beside him. Hermione's hand found his arm and squeezed tight enough to hurt. Umbridge's stare passed over their hiding spot. Passed on. She stepped back into her classroom and shut the door with careful precision. They waited a full minute before moving. When they finally crept from the alcove, the corridor stood empty, except for portraits who'd witnessed everything and would say nothing. Old habit born from centuries of watching student rebellions rise and fall. Blimey, Ron breathed. Did you see that? The spells just stopped? I saw it, Hermione said. Her voice shook slightly. I don't understand it, but I saw it. Harry said nothing. He was thinking about the way Gojo had stood there, utterly unconcerned, while magic that should have knocked him unconscious dissolved into nothing. He was thinking about Umbridge's face and the forms she'd tried to force on someone who clearly didn't need a wand to be dangerous. He was thinking about what happened next, because there was always a next with Umbridge. She didn't forgive. She didn't forget. And she had the full weight of the Ministry behind her. That night, as Harry lay in bed listening to Ron snore and Neville mumble through dreams, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if Gojo was an ally or another complication in a year that had already gone wrong from the start. Wondered if Umbridge would find a way to remove him, or if she'd try something worse. Wondered what kind of power could make magic itself hesitate. The castle settled around him, stone and spell, and centuries of secrets. Somewhere in it, Umbridge was writing a letter to the Ministry. And somewhere else, a man in dark clothes and a blindfold was probably smiling, unbothered by consequences he should have feared. Harry pulled his blanket higher and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring more decrees, more restrictions, more of Umbridge's poisonous sweetness. But tomorrow would also bring the knowledge that she had tried to curse someone and failed. For now in the darkness, that felt like something worth holding on to. The idea came to Hermione during breakfast 3 days after Gojo's confrontation with Umbridge. She'd been stabbing at her porridge with unnecessary violence, ignoring Ron's attempts at conversation, when she suddenly dropped her spoon and turned to Harry with the expression she got when inspiration struck. "We need to learn," she said. Harry blinked. "We are learning, sort of. If you count reading about spells we'll never use." "Actual defense," Hermione continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "Real practical work. If the Ministry won't teach us if Umbridge is going to keep us reading theory until Voldemort shows up at our doorstep, then we'll teach ourselves." Ron looked up from his eggs. "Teach ourselves, Hermione, we're students. We don't know enough to." "You do?" she interrupted, looking at Harry with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "You've fought off Dementors. You survived the Triwizard Tournament. You faced you-know-who twice and lived. If anyone can show us what we need to survive, it's you. Harry's stomach dropped. I'm not a teacher. Neither was Remus when he started, I'd wager. Neither was your father when he helped Sirius with transforming. People learn by doing, and right now we're doing nothing except waiting to die. The Great Hall continued its morning noise around them. Students laughed and complained about homework. Owls delivered post. Teachers ate their breakfast at the high table, faces turned away from problems they couldn't or wouldn't solve. Normal life carrying on while the world prepared to burn. Even if I agreed, Harry said quietly, where would we practice? Umbridge has eyes everywhere. She'd shut us down the moment she heard about it. Hermione's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then we make sure she doesn't hear. The room of requirement revealed itself 2 weeks later after Dobby let slip its existence while delivering clean socks to the hospital wing. Hermione had pounced on the information like a cat on a particularly slow mouse. And within days she'd mapped out meeting times, recruited members, and drawn up a practice schedule that made Ron go pale. They called it Dumbledore's Army. The name felt dangerous and right in equal measure a small rebellion against the Ministry's insistence that their headmaster was a liar and a fool. 25 students showed up for the first meeting, cramming into a room that obligingly expanded to fit them all. Harry stood at the front, acutely aware of every pair of watching him. Neville sat in the second row, round face set with determination. Luna Lovegood perched on a cushion the room had provided, looking dreamy and present all at once. The Patil twins whispered to each other. Dean and Seamus had come together, wands already out. Even Zacharias Smith had shown up, though his expression suggested he expected to be disappointed. Right. Harry said, his voice not quite steady. So, defense against the dark arts, the actual kind. He'd prepared a speech. Hermione had helped him write it, full of reasonable explanations about why they were doing this and what they hoped to achieve. He forgot every word the moment he opened his mouth. Look. He tried again. I'm not going to pretend I know everything. I don't. I've survived things mostly through luck and help from people who actually knew what they were doing. But Hermione's right. We can't just read about stunning spells and hope that's enough when Death Eaters show up. Has anyone actually seen Death Eaters? Zacharias asked, skepticism dripping from every word. Before Harry could answer, the door opened. Every wand in the room turned toward it. Gojo stepped through, ducking slightly to clear the frame, and stopped when he saw 24 students pointing magical weapons at his chest. Friendly bunch, he observed. The blindfold made it impossible to tell where he was looking, but Harry felt the weight of his attention anyway. Don't mind me, just passing through. Hermione stood. You can't be here. This is a private meeting. Notice that? Gojo moved further into the room, hands in his pockets, utterly unconcerned by the hostile welcome. Saw students heading this way. Got curious. Turns out curiosity is mutual. He surveyed the assembled group with apparent interest. What are we calling this study group? Secret society? Slightly illegal combat training? We're learning to defend ourselves, Neville said, his voice steadier than Harry had ever heard it. Since the adults won't teach us properly. Something in Gojo's posture shifted. The casual stance remained, but the quality of his attention changed, sharpened. Good, he said simply. You should. Hermione's wand hadn't lowered. Are you going to tell Umbridge? Why would I do that? Because you're a teacher. You're supposed to report this kind of thing. Gojo laughed. The sound was brief and genuine, and somehow made the entire situation feel more dangerous rather than less. I'm not a teacher, I'm someone the ministry stuck in your school because they don't know what else to do with me. Big difference. He looked at Harry. You're running this? Harry nodded, not trusting his voice. Then I'll make you a deal. I won't tell Umbridge about your little rebellion if you actually make it worth hiding. None of this timid practice wand waving. If you're going to learn to fight, learn to fight. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time. We know how to fight, Zacharias protested. Do you? Gojo turned to him. Prove it. Hit me with something, anything. I won't dodge. Zacharias hesitated, clearly suspecting a trap. When Gojo simply stood there waiting, he raised his wand and spoke the incantation for a stunning spell. Red light shot across the room. It slowed. Just like in Umbridge's classroom, the spell crawled through air that had turned reluctant fighting distance that refused to close. Students gasped. Some stood for a better view. The red light faded 3 feet from its target, dissolving into nothing. Right, Gojo said. So, here's lesson 1 and I'm giving it for free. Magic is great. Magic is powerful. But if you're standing still when you cast, you're already dead. Your enemy isn't going to wait politely while you aim. He moved a casual step to the side. They're going to move. They're going to make you miss. They're going to close the distance and hit you before you can try again. He gestured to Zacharias. Try again. This time, I'll move. The second stunner flew true, but Gojo wasn't where the spell expected him to be. He'd shifted left, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. The curse passed through empty air and splashed harmlessly against the far wall. See you aimed where I was not where I would be. Common mistake. Deadly mistake. Gojo addressed the room at large now, and despite the blindfold, Harry could feel those hidden eyes on each of them in turn. Fighting isn't about perfect form. It's about staying alive long enough to make your enemy dead. That means moving. That means thinking 3 steps ahead. That means not giving them a stationary target to curse. Hermione's wand finally lowered. You're offering to help us? I'm offering advice. Whether you take it is up to you. Gojo moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Don't just learn the pretty spells. Learn the dirty ones. Shield charms are great until someone hits you with something a shield won't stop. Disarming is useful unless your opponent isn't using a wand. The real world doesn't fight fair. Neither should you. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. The assembled students stared at where he'd been, then slowly turned to Harry. Well, Ron said eventually. That was mental. Training began in earnest. Harry taught them Expelliarmus, first the spell that had saved his life more than once. Students paired off practicing the wrist motion and incantation until the room rang with shouts of the charm. Wands flew through the air. Some students caught them. Most didn't. They practiced anyway. Hermione partnered with Neville. She was patient with his fumbling, correcting his stance without making him feel small. When he finally managed to disarm her on the 7th try, sending her wand spinning toward the ceiling, his face lit up with something that might have been joy, or might have been shock. I did it, he said, staring at his own wand as if seeing it for the first time. You did, Hermione agreed, retrieving her wand from where it had clattered to the floor. Now do it again. Harry moved through the pairs, offering corrections and encouragement in equal measure. Luna had partnered with Ginny and was performing the spell with her usual dreamy precision, as if disarming someone was no more remarkable than watering plants. The Patil twins worked together with competitive intensity. Dean had managed to disarm Seamus 3 times in a row and was looking insufferably pleased with himself. Zacharias, to his credit, had paired with Ernie Macmillan and was actually trying. His form was terrible, all rigid shoulders and jerky movements, but he was trying. "Relax," Harry told him. "You're fighting the spell. Let it flow." "Easy for you to say," Zacharias muttered, but he loosened his grip on his wand and tried again. This time Ernie's wand wobbled in his hand, not quite flying free, but closer than before. They practiced for an hour. By the end, most students could perform a basic, disarming charm, though few could do it reliably under pressure. Harry called a halt when he saw exhaustion setting in, faces flushed with effort and concentration. "Good work," he said, meaning it. "Next time we'll work on shield charms. The basic protego should be second nature to all of you. We'll keep practicing until it is." Students filed out in small groups, careful not to leave all at once, in case teachers were watching. Hermione lingered, helping Harry organize the practice dummies the room had helpfully provided. Ron had already left, claiming prefect duties, though everyone knew he was really going to find food. "Do you think Gojo meant it?" Hermione asked. "About not telling Umbridge?" Harry considered. "I think he doesn't care what Umbridge thinks, which isn't quite the same thing." "He's dangerous," Hermione said quietly. "The way he stopped those spells, the way he moves, it's not normal magic." "No," Harry agreed. "It's not." They finished tidying in silence. The room had already begun to shrink back to its default size, responding to the absence of need. Soon it would be just a door again, waiting for someone else to require it. The second meeting went better. Students arrived with more confidence, less fear. Harry taught shield charms, demonstrating the proper wand movement, while Hermione provided historical context that everyone ignored in favor of actually casting the spell. Neville struggled. His shield flickered and died, reformed and collapsed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His wand hand trembled with the effort of maintaining focus. "Stop thinking so hard," Harry advised. "You're trying to force it. Shield charms work best when you're protecting something specific. Think about what you're defending." Neville tried again. The shield held for 3 seconds before dissolving. He swore under his breath, a word Harry had never heard him use before. "Better," Harry said, and meant it. By the fourth meeting, word had spread. 5 more students joined, bringing their total to 30. The room expanded obligingly, providing more space and more practice dummies. Harry split them into groups by skill level, letting the more advanced students help teach the beginners. It freed him to move between clusters, catching mistakes and answering questions. Gojo showed up again during the 5th session. He didn't announce himself, just appeared at the back of the room and watched. Students noticed, but didn't stop practicing, too focused on their work to care about an audience. He stayed for 20 minutes. When Harry demonstrated a stunning spell showing proper form and follow-through, Gojo pushed off from the wall where he'd been leaning. "Decent," he said, voice carrying across the room. "But you're still thinking too much about the spell and not enough about the target." He walked to the center of the practice area. "Hit me." Harry hesitated. "I don't think—" "Hit me," Gojo repeated. "Full strength. Don't hold back." Every student in the room had stopped practicing. They watched as Harry raised his wand, aimed and cast. The stunner flew true and fast, red light crackling with intent. It slowed, stopped, faded. "Right," Gojo said. "So that won't work on me. But here's the thing, you didn't know that before you tried. You aimed center mass, good instinct. You put power into it, also good. What you didn't do is have a backup plan. gestured to the watching students. Real combat isn't one spell and done. It's layers. You cast, they dodge, or block, you're already casting the next thing. You keep pressure on them. You make them react instead of act. You give them so many problems they can't solve them all. Harry lowered his wand. How do you know all this? Gojo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its casual edge. Because I've fought people who wanted me dead. Because I've seen what happens when you hesitate or trust that one spell will be enough. Because survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being the one still standing when everything goes wrong. The room had gone very still. Even the practice dummies seemed to listen. You're doing good work here, Gojo continued, addressing them all now. Better than most would manage. But don't fool yourselves into thinking this makes you ready. Ready means you've been hit and learned to get back up. Ready means you've been scared and fought anyway. Ready means you understand that fair fights are for sports and this isn't a game. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Next time you practice, don't just work on landing your spells. Work on dodging. Work on moving while you cast. Work on fighting when you're tired and scared and everything hurts, because that's when it matters most. The door closed. Students exchanged glances. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Neville raised his wand. Again, he said to his partner. Let's go again. The practice resumed, but this time students moved as they cast. They ducked imaginary curses. They kept their feet planted wrong on purpose, learning to compensate. They pushed past the point where their arms ached and their focus wavered. Harry watched them work and thought about Gojo's words. About being ready. About survival. About the difference between practice and the real thing. Hermione found him after everyone had left. He's not wrong, she said, about any of it. I know, Harry replied, but he's also not telling us everything. About himself. About what he can do. She hugged her books to her chest. I've been researching. There's no record of anyone blocking spells the way he does. No family name matching his. Nothing in any registry. Maybe he's from somewhere else, another country. Maybe. Hermione didn't sound convinced. Or maybe he's something the books don't cover. They walked back to Gryffindor Tower in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Behind them, the room of requirement sealed itself, holding their secret safe for another day. In her office, Umbridge added another name to a list she kept in her desk's locked drawer. The list had grown longer lately. Students missing from their common rooms at odd hours. Whispers in corridors. A sense of conspiracy that her network of informants couldn't quite pin down. She would find them. She always did. And when she did, they would learn what happened to those who thought themselves above the rules she had worked so hard to establish. The quill in her hand wrote in neat, careful script. Making plans, preparing consequences, waiting. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by an owl that looked more official than living. Harry watched from across the great hall as the bird landed in front of Gojo, who'd been eating toast with the same casual disregard for proper meal etiquette that characterized everything else he did. The man took the letter, unfolded it with one hand, read it in silence, then touched one finger to the parchment. The paper crumbled to ash, as if years had passed in an instant, particles drifting onto his plate like snow. Several nearby students choked on their pumpkin juice. Subtle, Hermione muttered. The ashes drifted onto his plate. Gojo went back to his toast as if burning ministry correspondence was perfectly ordinary breakfast behavior. 3 hours later, Harry found himself heading to potions when he saw them in the corridor. 2 wizards in formal robes, the kind that screamed ministry authority without needing to say a word. They flanked Gojo like prison guards, though neither seemed comfortable with their positioning. One kept glancing at the man between them, as if expecting him to vanish. The other walked slightly too far away, maintaining distance that suggested caution rather than respect. Gojo looked bored. They disappeared around a corner toward the headmaster's office. Harry hesitated, torn between curiosity and the very real knowledge that Snape would dock points if he arrived late. Curiosity won. He ducked into a side passage and took the long route, the one that wound past tapestries and through a shortcut behind a statue of a witch holding what might have been a teapot, or might have been something more sinister. He emerged on the 7th floor just in time to see the Ministry wizards leading Gojo into an unused classroom. Not Dumbledore's office, then. Interesting. Harry remembered hearing Hermione mention something about Dumbledore refusing to allow Ministry personnel to conduct interrogations on school grounds without proper cause. Educational decree or not, the headmaster still controlled access to his own office. So they'd chosen neutral territory, a room that technically fell under Umbridge's authority as High Inquisitor. Harry pressed himself against the wall and edged closer. The door stood slightly ajar, voices drifting through the gap. "Appreciate your cooperation in this matter." The speaker had the clipped tones of someone used to being obeyed. "The Ministry simply requires certain assurances." "I'm sure it does." Gojo sounded amused. "Question is whether I'm interested in providing them." Papers rustled. "Professor Gojo, you must understand the delicate position we find ourselves in. Your presence at Hogwarts, while initially sanctioned, has raised concerns. The Undersecretary has been quite clear about the need for proper oversight." Undersecretary? The way Gojo said the word made it sound like an insult. "You mean Umbridge?" "Senior Undersecretary Umbridge has the full confidence of the Minister. Her concerns regarding unregistered abilities and potential security risks are entirely valid." Security risks? A chair creaked. That's rich coming from people who won't admit the actual threat standing at their door. The second Ministry official spoke, his voice smoother, more practiced. "We're not here to debate Ministry policy. We're here to offer you an opportunity to formalize your position. A simple binding agreement ensuring that your considerable talents are directed toward appropriate ends." Silence stretched. Harry barely breathed, afraid the sound might carry through the gap. "You want me to take an unbreakable vow," Gojo said finally. "Nothing so dramatic. Merely a standard contract with certain magical enforcement clauses. You would agree to follow Ministry directives to abstain from actions that might undermine lawful authority and to submit to periodic reviews of your activities." More paper sounds. "In exchange, you would receive official recognition, a proper salary, and protection under Ministry jurisdiction. And if I refuse," the first official's voice turned cold, "then we would be forced to consider alternative arrangements. Your presence here is provisional, Professor Gojo. It can be revoked. You could find yourself without position, without sanctuary, without the protections afforded to registered citizens of magical Britain." "Threats?" Gojo laughed, brief and sharp. "I've had better ones from first-year students. This is not a threat. This is an explanation of consequences. Sign the contract or face removal from Hogwarts and potential detention pending investigation into the circumstances of your arrival." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Harry found himself gripping his wand without conscious thought, though what he'd do against Ministry officials he had no idea. "No," Gojo said simply. "I beg your pardon? No, I'm not signing anything. I'm not taking orders from people who spend more time protecting their positions than protecting actual people. And I'm especially not interested in helping Umbridge feel better about the fact that she can't control me. Movement, footsteps. You can tell her I said that. Word for word if you want. You're making a grave mistake. Am I? Gojo's voice had shed all amusement. Because from where I'm standing, the only mistake would be trusting anything that woman puts her name on. Now, if we're done here, I have actual work to do. The door swung open. Harry jerked back, but not fast enough. Gojo stepped into the corridor and stopped looking directly at where Harry pressed himself against the stone wall. The blindfold hid his expression, but Harry felt the weight of that hidden gaze. "Shouldn't you be in class?" Gojo asked. "Shouldn't you be signing contracts?" The words came out before Harry could stop them. One corner of Gojo's mouth twitched. "Probably, but then I'd have to actually follow them. And where's the fun in that?" He walked past, then paused. "Word of advice. When you're eavesdropping, pick a spot where your shadow doesn't give you away." Harry looked down. Sure enough, his shadow stretched across the floor in full view of anyone leaving the room. He felt his face heat. By the time he looked up, Gojo had already rounded the corner. The ministry officials emerged moments later, faces tight with frustration. They didn't notice Harry, too focused on their whispered argument as they stalked toward the stairs. Harry waited until their footsteps faded before moving. He was definitely late for potions now. Snape would take points, probably assign detention. But as Harry hurried through the corridors, he found he didn't particularly care. The ministry had tried to leash Gojo and failed, which meant they'd try something else, something worse. Potions class was exactly as terrible as expected. Snape took 20 points from Gryffindor before Harry even sat down assigned an essay on the properties of Moonstone that was due the next morning, and spent the entire lesson looming over students like a particularly malevolent bird of prey. But it was after class, as Harry gathered his books with more force than necessary, that Snape's voice cut through the general exodus. "Potter, stay." Ron shot him a sympathetic look. Hermione hesitated, but Snape's glare sent her fleeing with the others. The door closed. Silence filled the dungeon like water flooding a ship. Snape didn't speak immediately. He arranged vials on his desk with meticulous precision, each movement deliberate. Finally, he looked up. "You were late to class today." "Yes, sir." "Wandering the corridors when you should have been attending your lessons?" Harry said nothing. Anything he said would be wrong. "Tell me, Potter, what do you know about our visiting professor?" The question caught Harry off guard. "Sir, Gojo." Snape pronounced the name with distaste. "What has he told you about himself, about where he came from, about what he can do?" "Nothing, sir. He doesn't really talk about himself." Snape's fingers drummed once on his desk. "Yet, I'm told he's taken a rather keen interest in certain student activities. Study groups, perhaps. Extracurricular practice sessions." His gaze sharpened. The sort of gatherings that might violate Educational Decree number 24. Harry's throat went dry. "I don't know what you mean." "No." Snape leaned forward slightly. "Then you won't mind explaining why several students report seeing you enter rooms that subsequently cease to exist. Rooms where Gojo has also been observed lurking." The trap closed. If Harry denied everything, Snape would know he was lying and press harder. If he admitted to the room of requirement, but claimed it wasn't for defense practice, Snape would still report it to Umbridge. And if he mentioned the DA, "We're just practicing." Harry said the words tumbling out before he could stop them. We needed to learn actual defense, not Umbridge's useless theory. He stopped. Too late. Snape's expression didn't change, but something in the air grew colder. We. How interesting. And what precisely do you call this little organization? Harry's mind raced. Deny everything. Claim it was a study group, make up something about Dumbledore's army being a historical research project. I see. Snape moved around his desk robes, billowing. You stand there silent, believing your pathetic attempts at deception will protect you. They won't. I know about your little gatherings, Potter. I know about your flagrant disregard for educational decrees. And I know that Gojo Satoru has been observing these activities. He stopped an arm's length away, staring down with those black eyes that seemed to drill straight through skin and bone. Has he asked you to do anything, suggested any particular actions, encouraged you in directions that seemed unusual? No, Harry said, and meant it. He mostly just gives advice about not dying. How reassuring. Snape's lip curled. You are aware, I trust, that this man appeared in the Department of Mysteries under circumstances no one can adequately explain. That he possesses abilities that do not conform to any known magical discipline. That he has refused every attempt at proper registration and oversight. So, Snape said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. He is dangerous, Potter. More dangerous than your limited perspective can comprehend. And you, with your typical arrogance, have welcomed him into your confidence without question. He's helping us learn to defend ourselves, which is more than this school is doing. The slap never came, though Harry braced for it. Instead, Snape stepped back, something almost like weariness crossing his face, before the usual mask of contempt reasserted itself. Defending yourselves. Against what precisely? Against imagined threats, against authority figures you've decided are enemies simply because they demand accountability. Against Voldemort. The name fell between them like a stone down a well. Snape's jaw tightened. Get out, he said quietly. Sir, get out. Harry left. He made it 3 corridors away before his hand stopped shaking. That night, Harry dreamed. He stood in a long room lined with shelves. Prophecy orbs glowed in the darkness, thousands of them, each one containing a whisper of future that might or might not come to pass. He walked between the rows, searching, though he didn't know what he sought. A voice called his name. He turned. Sirius stood at the end of the aisle. His godfather's face was gaunt, marked by Azkaban's long shadow, but his eyes held warmth. Relief. He reached out one hand. Harry, you came. Sirius, Harry's voice cracked. What are you doing here? Waiting for you. They have me, Harry. Voldemort's servants. They want the prophecy, and they'll kill me if you don't bring it to them. Where are you? Department of Mysteries, Hall of Prophecy, row 97. Sirius's image flickered. Hurry, please. The dream shattered. Harry woke gasping, sheets tangled around his legs, scar burning with familiar fire. Around him, the dormitory slept on. Ron's snores continued undisturbed. Neville muttered something about plants. Harry pressed his fingers to his forehead and tried to slow his breathing. Just a dream. Just a nightmare brought on by stress and Snape's interrogation and the general awfulness of his existence. Except it hadn't felt like a dream. It had felt like a vision. He lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. The rows of prophecies. Sirius's desperate expression. The specific location. Row 97. By breakfast, he'd almost convinced himself it meant nothing. Dreams were just dreams after all. His scar had hurt before without signaling anything important. almost convinced. But the image of Sirius stayed with him through morning classes, through lunch, through afternoon lessons, where professors' voices became background noise to the loop playing in his head. By dinner, he decided to tell Hermione. She'd know what to do. She always did. He found her in the library, surrounded by books about defensive magic and magical theory. Ron sat across from her, looking pained as she explained some complex concept involving shield variations. "I need to talk to you," Harry said without preamble. "Both of you." They found an empty corner. Harry told them about the dream about Sirius, about the Department of Mysteries. Hermione's expression grew more concerned with each sentence. Ron had gone pale. "Have you told anyone else?" Hermione asked. "Dumbledore, McGonagall." Harry shook his head. "Dumbledore's barely at the school anymore. And McGonagall would just tell me it's stress or tell me to wait, and there isn't time." "What about Gojo?" Ron suggested. "He's supposed to be some kind of expert at this stuff, isn't he?" Harry had thought about it for about 3 seconds before Snape's words came flooding back. Dangerous. Can't be trusted. And even beyond that, something in Harry resisted the idea of running to Gojo for help. The man would probably try to stop them, tell them it was too risky, that they were walking into a trap. Maybe he'd be right. But that didn't change the fact that Sirius needed help. "No," Harry said firmly. "We handle this ourselves." Hermione grabbed his arm. "Harry," she said carefully, "you know these visions aren't always reliable. Remember what Dumbledore said about Voldemort being able to—" "I know what Dumbledore said. But what if it's real? What if Sirius is actually in danger and I ignore it because I'm worried about being manipulated?" "What if it's a trap?" Ron countered. "What if you-know-who is trying to lure you there? Then I walk into it with my eyes open instead of leaving Sirius to die." Hermione grabbed his arm. "You can't be serious. You can't actually be considering going to the Ministry based on a dream." "It wasn't a dream," Harry insisted. "It was more than that. I felt it. I saw it. Sirius needs help." They argued in whispers for another 10 minutes. Hermione pulled out every logical reason why this was a terrible idea. Ron pointed out that they were students, not Aurors, and breaking into the Ministry would probably get them killed or expelled or both. Harry listened to it all and remained unmoved. "I'm going," he said finally, "with or without you." Hermione closed her eyes. When she opened them, they held resignation and determination in equal measure. "Then I suppose we're coming with you, because someone has to keep you from getting yourself killed." "Brilliant," Ron muttered. "Absolutely brilliant. This is definitely going to end well." They made plans. Quiet ones, careful ones that felt entirely inadequate for the task ahead. As they huddled in the corner of the library discussing routes and timing and what spells they'd need, Harry felt the weight of decisions settling over him like a cloak. This would change things. He knew it the way he knew his own name. Going to the Department of Mysteries, walking into what might be a trap, bringing his friends along. It was a line he couldn't uncross. But Sirius was family. The only family Harry had left that mattered. So they planned and plotted and prepared for a rescue that logic said was doomed before it began. In her office, Umbridge smiled as she reviewed the latest reports from her network of informants. Students meeting in secret. Whispered conversations. A sense of conspiracy growing like mold in dark places. Soon, she thought. Very soon now. And elsewhere in the castle, Gojo stood at a window looking out at grounds wrapped in twilight. He'd caught fragments earlier. Students huddled in the library, voices tight with urgency. Words that had drifted through walls and distance ministry. Sirius. Tonight. Not enough to know the full picture, not enough to be certain, but enough to recognize the shape of something wrong. The Potter boy was planning something reckless. That much was obvious from the way he and his friends had moved through the castle with that particular tension that preceded stupid decisions. Whether it was actually dangerous or just adolescent rebellion masquerading as heroism, Gojo couldn't say. He could guess, though, and his guesses were usually right. The question was whether he'd intervene now, stop them before they could leave, or whether he'd give them enough rope to learn from their mistakes. Harry Potter had to make his own choices, had to learn his own lessons. But that didn't mean those lessons needed to be fatal. Gojo turned from the window and headed for the door. He wouldn't stop them. Wouldn't lecture or forbid or pull rank. But he'd follow. Close enough to intervene if whatever they were walking into turned out to be more than they could handle. Far enough that they'd have to try first. He had preparations of his own to make. They almost didn't make it out of the castle. Umbridge caught them in the entrance hall, surrounded by members of the inquisitorial squad, who looked far too pleased with themselves. Draco Malfoy's smirk was particularly insufferable as he held Hermione's arm in a grip that would leave bruises. "Well, well," Umbridge said, her voice dripping poisoned sugar. "Out for a midnight stroll, are we? How unfortunate that Educational Decree number 68 specifically prohibits student movement after hours without proper authorization." Harry's hand moved toward his wand. Umbridge's moved faster. "I wouldn't, Mr. Potter. Not unless you want your friends to suffer the consequences of your poor judgment." She gestured to the inquisitorial squad. "Take them to my office, all of them." The office was exactly as pink and horrible as Harry remembered. Porcelain cats watched from every surface with knowing eyes. Umbridge settled behind her desk and smiled. "Now then, where were you going?" "Nowhere," Harry said. "Liar." The word came out flat without the usual sweetness. "You were heading somewhere specific, somewhere urgent. Tell me where, or I'll have your friends detained in ways that will make simple detention seem pleasant." Hermione's sharp intake of breath suggested an idea forming. "The forest," she blurted. "We were going to the forest. Professor Dumbledore has something hidden there, weapons, for his army." Umbridge's eyes lit with predatory interest. "Weapons? What sort of weapons?" "I don't know exactly. But you said you wanted proof he was planning rebellion. It's there, in the forest." It was a desperate gambit, but Umbridge's greed overrode her caution. She stood already calculating how this information could be used. "Show me." They led her into the forbidden forest, with the centaurs watching from the shadows. Harry caught Hermione's eye, understood her plan. When Umbridge was distracted by searching for non-existent weapons, they ran. The centaurs found her first. Her screams faded into the darkness behind them as they sprinted back toward the castle. Harry's scar burned. The vision of Sirius, tortured and desperate, overwhelmed everything else. But they needed to be sure. Needed to check before they did something irreversible. Umbridge's office stood empty fireplace unguarded. Harry grabbed a handful of flue powder with shaking hands and thrust his head into the flames. Number 12 Grimold Place. The kitchen materialized around his vision. Empty chairs, cold fireplace. Then Creature appeared, yellowed eyes gleaming with something that might have been malice or might have been madness. "Is Sirius there?" Harry demanded. "Is he safe?" Creature's smile was all wrong. "Master has gone out. Master is not here. Master is never here when you need him, is he?" Where did he go? Where is he? Creature does not tell the blood trader's secrets. The elf's voice carried satisfaction. Master is gone. Master is in danger. Master needs help that will not come. Harry pulled back from the flames, heart hammering. Gone. In danger. The vision had been real. Sirius was at the Department of Mysteries, and every second wasted was another second he suffered. "We have to go," Harry said. "Now." Ron grabbed his arm. "Harry, what if it's..." "It's not a trick," Creature confirmed it. "Sirius is there, and he's in trouble." They ran. Empty fireplaces lined the atrium walls, their silence oppressive after the constant whoosh and flame of daytime traffic. The fountain of magical brethren stood frozen mid-celebration water, still as glass, reflecting nothing. Harry's footsteps echoed too loud against polished floors designed to swallow sound. They'd come through the visitor's entrance. Luna had released something into the security area, a creature that shimmered between visible and not its presence, making the night guard's eyes unfocus and his memory slip. By the time he realized visitors had entered, they were already descending into the lifts. The lift descended with a mechanical whir that set Harry's teeth on edge. Numbers flickered past. 8, 7, 6. Each floor a layer deeper into the heart of wizarding government, each one taking them further from anything resembling safety. "This is mad," Ron whispered for the third time. "Completely mental. We're going to die." "We're not going to die," Hermione said, though her grip on her wand suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Neville stood very straight, chin up, trying to look brave and mostly succeeding. Luna gazed at the lift ceiling as if it held secrets. Ginny checked her wand lips, moving in silent practice of the spells they'd learned in the room of requirement. The lift shuddered to a halt. Level 9. Department of Mysteries. The corridor beyond the gate stretched black and windowless. The walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the air tasted of old magic and older secrets. Harry stepped out first because he'd gotten them into this, because Sirius was his godfather, because someone had to move and the others were waiting for him to lead. The door at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar. Blue light flickered beyond it, cold and unwelcoming. Harry pushed it open. The circular room spun. Doors identical to the one they'd entered through rotated around them in dizzying succession, black against black, each one indistinguishable from the next. By the time the room stopped moving, Harry had lost all sense of which door they'd come through. "Mark it," Hermione said, already pulling out her wand. She cast a simple charm that left a glowing X on the door nearest to her. "So we can find our way back." The mark flickered, faded slightly. The room's magic was already working to erase it, treating their attempt at navigation as an intrusion to be countered. They had minutes at best before it vanished entirely. They chose a door at random. It opened onto a room full of clocks, thousands of them, ticking out of sync in a cacophony that made Harry's head ache. Wrong room. They backed out, tried another door. This one led to a chamber where something massive swam through darkness behind glass, its shape too large and too wrong to process. Also wrong. The third door revealed rows upon rows of shelves. Prophecy orbs glowed softly in the darkness, stretching away into distance that felt impossible for a room this size. Harry's breath caught. "This is it," he said. They moved between the shelves, wands lit, reading the small plaques beneath each orb. Names of people Harry didn't recognize, dates stretching back decades. Predictions about futures that may or may not have come to pass. The place felt sacred and terrible in equal measure, a library of fates not yet written. Row 97 appeared suddenly, the number gleaming on a plaque at the shelf's end. Harry's scar throbbed. Not the sharp pain of proximity to Voldemort, but a dull ache that suggested connection, awareness, danger. "Sirius," Harry called softly. His voice vanished into the shadows between shelves. "Sirius, are you here?" Silence answered him. No chains, no sounds of struggle, no voice calling back. Just row after row of glowing orbs and the weight of prophecies pressing down from all sides. "Harry," Hermione's voice carried warning. "Something's wrong." Before Harry could respond, footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Not running, strolling, confident. The measured pace of people who knew they had all the time in the world. Death Eaters emerged from the shadows like smoke taking form. They came from every aisle, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. Black robes, white masks, wands already drawn. Harry counted 12 before he stopped counting 2, focused on the fact that they were surrounded, that he'd led his friends into exactly the trap Hermione had warned about. The lead Death Eater pulled off his mask. Lucius Malfoy smiled like a man who'd already won. "Surely you didn't think we'd let you walk in here without a proper welcome, Potter?" His voice carried the same aristocratic drawl as his son's, but edged with cruelty Draco had yet to perfect. "The Dark Lord has been most patient, waiting for you to retrieve his property." "I don't have anything of his," Harry said, though his hand had already moved to his pocket where a small glass orb sat taken from the shelf without conscious thought. His name had been on the plaque, Harry Potter and the Dark Lord, a prophecy he hadn't asked for and didn't want. "No." Malfoy's gaze flicked to Harry's pocket. "I think you'll find you do. Now, hand it over, and perhaps we'll let your little friends leave, with all their limbs attached." Wands raised on both sides. 6 students against 12 Death Eaters. The math wasn't complicated. Then the temperature in the room changed. It didn't drop. The air itself seemed to acknowledge something approaching something that didn't fit the careful architecture of ancient magic that governed this place. The Death Eaters' attention shifted from the students to a point behind them, masks turning in unison like birds tracking a predator. Gojo stepped through the doorway. Not from empty air, not through apparition. He'd simply found them the way he seemed to find everything, by reading the shape of spaces and the weight of intent. He looked tired in a way that suggested he'd been moving fast, searching blind through a building designed to resist exactly that kind of intrusion. "Found you," he said, more to himself than to them. Then, louder, "Everyone's still breathing." "Interesting party," Gojo observed. "Wasn't invited, but I came anyway. Hope that's not rude." Malfoy's smile faltered. "This doesn't concern you, stranger. Walk away while you still can." "See, I would. But these kids are kind of my responsibility. Professional obligation and all that." Gojo tilted his head. "Also, 12 on 6 seems unfair. Thought I'd even the odds." One of the Death Eaters laughed. "You're outnumbered, fool. 1 man against 12 wizards in masks who ambush children in the dark." Gojo's voice had shed its casual tone. "Yeah, sounds about right for your crowd." The first curse came without warning. Purple light lanced across the space where Gojo had been standing. Except he wasn't standing there anymore. He'd moved minimal shift, maximum effect. The curse splashed harmlessly against the far shelves. 3 more followed. Different angles, different spells coordinated assault from Death Eaters who'd done this before. Gojo moved through them like water through a sieve, each attack finding nothing but empty air. He didn't hurry, didn't seem concerned, just existed in spaces between where the magic tried to reach. "Harry," he said without looking back, Get your friends out of here, now! But the Death Eaters had anticipated retreat. More of them appeared blocking the aisles, hemming the students into an ever-shrinking space. Bellatrix Lestrange's cackle echoed from somewhere to the left, high and delighted. Going somewhere, little ones. But we've only just started playing. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. We need to... A shelving unit exploded. Prophecy orbs shattered, releasing their contents in ghostly whispers. Futures unrealized dissolved into mist. Death Eaters advanced from 3 side spells, flying in earnest, now no longer toying with their prey. Gojo moved. It wasn't teleportation, wasn't apparition. He simply stopped being in one location and started being in another, appearing beside Ron as a curse flew toward the boy's back. The spell hit something invisible and stopped suspended in air that had turned hostile to magic. Gojo's hand shot out, grabbed the Death Eater's wand and twisted. The snap echoed through the hall. Another Death Eater lunged at Neville. Gojo was there first. He caught the man's wrist, mid-curse applied pressure, and the Death Eater dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Impressive, Malfoy said from his safe distance. But you can't protect them all. Not from this. He gestured. 6 Death Eaters cast simultaneously a coordinated barrage of cutting curses and worse things spells designed to maim rather than stun. The attacks converged on the students from multiple angles. Gojo blurred. For the first time, Harry saw something that looked like effort. Gojo's movements became precise, calculated, flowing from one position to the next in a continuous motion that seemed to exist outside normal time. Curses stopped mid-flight. Space warped around the students, creating barriers that weren't quite shields, weren't quite walls, but somehow achieved both effects. One spell made it through, a cutting curse that would have taken Ginny's arm off at the shoulder. Gojo caught it, not with his hands, with whatever impossible power let him bend distance to his will. The magic hung frozen between them, a red slash of malice suspended in nothing. The air here fought him. The department didn't like being bent. He looked at the curse, then at the Death Eater who'd cast it. Then he crushed the spell like crumpling paper, reducing it to sparks that faded into darkness. My turn, he said quietly. The air pressure changed. It didn't increase or decrease so much as become aware of itself. Gojo raised one hand palm out, and the space around the Death Eaters contracted. Not violently. Not with the crush of gravity or the slam of force. Space simply decided that the Death Eaters were closer together than they'd been, and reality agreed. They stumbled into each other, wands tangling curses, firing wild, as they tried to maintain position in a room that no longer followed the rules they understood. Gojo walked through the chaos he'd created. Each step took him past another masked figure. Each one he touched collapsed wands falling from nerveless fingers. He didn't strike them, didn't need to. His hand on their shoulder or wrist or anywhere seemed to be enough. They dropped and didn't rise. Bellatrix shrieked something wordless and vicious. A spell Harry had never seen before, something that made the air itself scream, tore toward Gojo with the force of hatred made manifest. It was the kind of magic that killed through sheer malice, the kind that left no survivors. Gojo stopped it with 2 fingers. The spell hit that invisible barrier and simply ended. Not reflected, not absorbed, ended as if it had never been cast at all. Bellatrix stared, her mad grin faltering. Nice try, Gojo said. But I've seen worse from people who are actually good at this. He snapped his fingers. The gesture looked casual, meaningless. The effect was precise. Space contracted around 3 Death Eaters simultaneously. not crushing them but pulling their equilibrium sideways, making down become diagonal and forward become nowhere. They stumbled, disoriented wands firing at angles that made no sense. One curse hit another Death Eater. Friendly fire born of geometry gone wrong. The department resisted him. Ancient magic woven into the walls pushed back against his manipulation, making everything harder, slower. He could do more. He didn't. Not here, where the architecture itself seemed to notice when someone bent the rules too far. Malfoy was retreating now, backing toward the exit with his wand raised but ineffective. 3 Death Eaters lay unconscious. 2 more were disarmed, weaponless, and cornered. Then Bellatrix's voice cut through the hall, high and gleeful and wrong. "Little baby Potter looking for your godfather?" She appeared at the far end of the aisle, near a doorway Harry hadn't noticed before. "He's calling your name just like your parents did. Screaming it, actually. Should hear the way he begs." Harry's scar exploded with pain. The vision overlaid reality. Sirius screaming. Sirius bleeding, Sirius dying, and his legs moved before his brain could catch up. "Harry, no." Hermione's shout came from behind him, but Harry was already running. Through the rows of prophecies, toward Bellatrix's retreating form, toward the doorway that led deeper into the department, toward the place where Sirius had to be, where the vision promised he was suffering, where every second of hesitation meant more pain. Gojo turned torn between the Death Eaters, still fighting, and the boy sprinting into danger. His voice carried across the distance. "Potter, stop." Harry didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The doorway swallowed him whole, and Bellatrix's laughter echoed from stone walls as the passage twisted deeper into the department's heart. Behind him, Gojo swore. He could follow Harry into whatever trap waited in the depths, leave the other students to face the remaining Death Eaters alone. Or he could finish securing this area, trust that Harry could survive long enough for backup to arrive. Neither choice was good. Both would have consequences. He made his decision in the space between heartbeats. "Hermione!" Gojo's shout cracked like a whip. "Get everyone back to the entrance, now! Don't wait for me!" Then he was moving, chasing after Harry, leaving the Hall of Prophecy behind. The remaining Death Eaters took advantage of his departure, rallying, pressing the students harder. But they'd bought time. Enough for Hermione to grab Ron, for Neville to pull Luna and Ginny toward retreat, for the group to fall back toward the exit. The prophecy orbs glowed in the darkness, silent witnesses to futures fracturing in real time. Harry ran through corridors that seemed to twist back on themselves. The stone beneath his feet changed, texture grew colder. The quality of darkness shifted from the mere absence of light to something more oppressive, more aware. He burst through a final archway and stopped. The death chamber waited before him, exactly as it had appeared in his vision. Stone benches rising in tiers, an ancient archway at the center draped with that tattered veil that moved despite the still air. Empty. No Sirius, no chains, no torture. Just Bellatrix standing on the far side of the veil, smiling with the face of someone who'd won a game Harry hadn't known he was playing. "Oops," she said. "Did you actually believe that? How deliciously stupid." Footsteps behind him. Gojo appeared in the doorway, breathing harder than Harry had ever seen him breathe. "Harry, step back from the veil." But Harry wasn't listening. The prophecy orb in his pocket burned against his leg. The chamber spun. His scar screamed with pain that meant Voldemort was close, was watching, was pleased. More footsteps. Running. Multiple people converging on this room from different entrances. Somewhere above, warnings had already been sent. The castle had noticed students missing. Someone, Snape perhaps, or the wards themselves had raised the alarm. The Order had been moving since the moment Hogwarts realized its children were gone. The trap was springing shut, and they were standing at its center. Sirius burst through the opposite doorway. Real, alive, free. His wand was drawn, his face set with the expression of someone who'd moved heaven and earth to get here. Behind him came members of the Order of the Phoenix Remus Tonks, moody others Harry recognized from photographs. "Harry!" Sirius shouted across the chamber. "Get away from the veil!" Relief crashed through Harry with such force it nearly dropped him. Sirius was okay. The vision had been wrong. Everything was. More Death Eaters poured through the entrances, not the scattered few from the Hall of Prophecy. A coordinated force, fresh and ready, surrounding the chamber from all sides. They'd been waiting for this, for the Order to show themselves, for everyone to gather in one place. The real battle was only just beginning, and the veil hung in its archway, watching everything with patient hunger. The death chamber erupted into chaos. Spells crossed the space in streams of color that painted the stone walls with violent light. Death Eaters and Order members clashed in a battle that had been brewing for months, years, lifetimes. The veil swayed in its archway, indifferent to the violence unfolding in its presence. Harry tried to reach Sirius across the chamber, but the fighting had created a wall of bodies and magic between them. A curse flew past his head, close enough to singe hair. Ron yanked him down behind a stone bench as another volley of spells shattered where they'd been standing. "Stay low," Hermione shouted over the noise. Her face was pale but determined, wand raised, tracking threats with the focus she usually reserved for exams. Gojo moved through the battle like water finding cracks in stone. He didn't fight the way wizards fought, no dramatic duels, no shouted incantations. He simply appeared where Death Eaters aimed their wands and made those wands irrelevant. One moment, a masked figure would be casting a curse. The next, they'd be on the ground unconscious, their weapon broken or gone. But there were too many. For every Death Eater, Gojo neutralized 2 more pressed forward. The Order was outnumbered, outpositioned. This wasn't the scattered ambush from the Hall of Prophecy. This was coordinated assault, Death Eaters working in teams covering angles, using the chamber's architecture against their enemies. Bellatrix cackled from somewhere near the veil, her voice cutting through the din like broken glass. "Dance, little blood traitors, dance while you still have legs." Sirius fought his way toward Harry, blasting curses aside with the practiced ease of someone who'd been dueling since before Harry was born. His face held something Harry had never seen there before, not just determination, but fear. Fear for Harry. Fear of what might happen if he didn't reach his godson in time. "Harry, get back." Sirius's shout barely reached across the chamber. "Get out of here!" But Harry couldn't leave. Couldn't run. Not while Sirius was still fighting, still in danger. The prophecy orb in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, a reminder of why they'd come here, why this was happening. A Death Eater appeared beside Neville, a wand raised for a killing curse. Gojo was there before the spell could form. His hand caught the Death Eater's throat, and the man crumpled. But in that moment of distraction, 3 more Death Eaters coordinated their attack on Tonks. She went down, hard blood spreading across the stone floor. Remus screamed her name. The sound held anguish that made Harry's chest hurt. The battle compressed. Death Eaters pushed the Order back toward the veil, using the archway as a tactical point, forcing their enemies into an ever-shrinking space. Gojo tried to counter, manipulating distance to create barriers, but the chamber fought him. The ancient magic here was layered, purposeful, designed to contain rather than enable. Then, Sirius and Bellatrix met. It wasn't dramatic. No exchange of words, no build-up. just two people who'd hated each other for decades, finally getting the chance to settle old scores. Bellatrix's curse came fast and vicious. Sirius dodged, countered his own spell, missing by inches as Bellatrix laughed and spun away. They dueled at the edge of the raised stone dais where the veil hung. Each step took them closer to that ancient archway, closer to the boundary between here and somewhere else. Sirius's face held concentration, but also something that might have been joy. This was what he'd been made for. What Azkaban had tried to take from him and failed. Harry watched frozen as his godfather fought with the skill of a black family heir, the grace of someone who'd spent his youth learning to kill beautifully. Bellatrix fainted left. Sirius followed. Too late, he realized his mistake. Her spell caught him in the chest. Not a killing curse. Something else, something that made Sirius stumble backward off balance, his wand falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. He teetered on the edge of the dais, arms windmilling, eyes wide with the sudden understanding that he was falling. The veil was behind him, waiting. Harry's scream tore from his throat. "Sirius!" Gojo moved. Faster than Harry had ever seen him move, faster than thought crossing the chamber in a blur of motion that bent space itself. His hand reached out, fingers spread, pulling with that invisible force that made distance meaningless. Blue light flared. The spell that let Gojo attract objects, pull them toward him, yanked them from wherever they were to wherever he needed them to be. Harry had seen him use it before, casual as breathing. Sirius jerked forward, stopped falling. For a heartbeat, it looked like it would work. Then Sirius crossed the threshold. One moment he was there, suspended between falling and saved. The next, he was beyond the veil's plane, in that space where the tattered fabric separated this world from whatever lay beyond. And Gojo's pull found nothing to grasp. The blue light died. Gojo's hand remained extended, fingers still spread, but they closed on empty air. His face, what little showed around the blindfold, went absolutely still. Sirius fell through, not fast, almost gently, like someone sinking into deep water. His mouth opened, shaped words Harry couldn't hear. Then the veil swallowed him whole, fabric settling back into its perpetual stirring as if nothing had happened. Silence crashed across the chamber. The fighting didn't stop, curses still flew, people still bled. But for Harry, everything had gone quiet. Numbness spread from his chest, outward, freezing thought, freezing breath, freezing the world into a tableau of the moment before everything ended. "No," Harry whispered. Then louder, "No." He ran. Didn't think, didn't plan, just moved toward the archway where Sirius had disappeared. If he could just get through, if he could follow, if he could bring him back. Arms caught him. Strong arms that pulled him backward, even as he fought, screamed, tried to break free. Remus Lupin held him with the strength of someone who'd lost too many people to lose another. "He's gone, Harry." Remus's voice cracked. "He's gone. Let me go. I can still—" "You can't." Gojo's voice cut through Harry's desperation. He stood where he'd tried to catch Sirius, hands still raised, staring at the veil with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been understanding. He crossed over. "Once you're on the other side, you're not here anymore. Not in space, not in time, not in anything I can reach." Harry stared at him. "You stopped the Death Eater's spells. You caught curses mid-air. You bend space itself. And you're telling me you can't pull him back. The veil isn't space." Gojo's hand finally lowered. "It's the edge where space ends. The boundary between existence and non-existence. I can manipulate what is. I can't manipulate what isn't. Bellatrix's laughter rang out high and delighted. Poor little Potter. Lost your dog father, did you? How terribly sad. Something in Harry broke. Rage flooded through the numbness, hot and consuming. His wand came up the curse already forming on his lips. Light exploded across the chamber. Not from Harry. From the entrance where a figure now stood silhouetted against the blue glow of the corridor beyond. Albus Dumbledore had arrived, and with him came the kind of power that made the battle freeze mid-motion. Death Eaters scattered. Some disapparated immediately, the distinctive crack of their departure echoing off stone. Others tried to run through the exits, only to find their paths blocked by shields that appeared from nowhere. Bellatrix hesitated. For the first time, her smile faltered. Then she too was gone, vanishing, with a sound like tearing fabric. But not all the Death Eaters fled. Some stayed, and Harry understood why. When he felt it, the cold, creeping sensation of a presence so malevolent, it made the air itself recoil. Voldemort materialized in the center of the chamber. He was pale as bone-red eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Those eyes found Harry, and a smile curved lips too thin to properly hold the expression. Harry Potter. The voice was high and soft and terrible. How good of you to deliver the prophecy personally. Dumbledore moved forward, placing himself between Voldemort and the students. Tom. How predictable of you to prey on children. Predictable. Voldemort's smile widened. I would call it efficient. The boy came to me, led his friends into my trap, even brought along this curious anomaly. His gaze shifted to Gojo. You are not of this world. I can taste it on you, the wrongness, the displacement. Gojo didn't respond. He was still staring at the veil hand, clenching and unclenching at his side. Leave, Dumbledore said quietly. All of you. This is not your fight. But before anyone could move, Voldemort struck. The duel that followed belonged to a different kind of magic than Harry had ever seen. Dumbledore and Voldemort traded spells that warped reality, that made stone flow like water and air crack like glass. Fire shaped itself into serpents. Water became shields. The chamber transformed into a battlefield where the laws of nature bent to the will of two men who'd spent lifetimes mastering their craft. Gojo pulled the students back, creating a barrier of twisted space that deflected stray curses. But he didn't join the fight. His attention kept returning to the veil as if he was working out a problem that refused to resolve. A pillar of flame erupted where Dumbledore had been standing. The headmaster emerged from it, unscathed, his own counterspell, already forming a whip of pure light that carved through Voldemort's defenses. The Dark Lord hissed, dodging, retaliating with a curse that turned the air black. The Order fought the remaining Death Eaters at the chamber's edges, but the real battle was the duel at its center. Harry watched numb as the two most powerful wizards of the age tried to destroy each other. Voldemort's strategy became clear. He wasn't trying to kill Dumbledore. He was trying to reach Harry. Every attack, every maneuver was designed to create an opening to the students. Dumbledore recognized it, matched it, positioned himself perfectly, blocking every attempt, turning Voldemort's aggression against him. Then Voldemort did something unexpected. He stopped attacking Dumbledore entirely and turned to Gojo. You, he said, you have power. I offer you a place. Join me, and together we could reshape this world into something worthy. Gojo finally looked away from the veil. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual casual tone. Not interested. No. Voldemort's head tilted. Even knowing you failed here, even understanding that your power, impressive as it is, cannot breach certain boundaries, especially knowing that. Gojo's posture shifted. For the first time since Sirius fell, he seemed to focus on the present moment. You use other people's deaths to make yourself feel powerful. That's about the least interesting thing anyone can do. Voldemort's face twisted with rage. He struck a curse so dark, it made the stone where it hit begin to rot. Gojo didn't move. The curse stopped an inch from his chest, suspended in that impossible space he carried with him everywhere. Then it simply ceased to exist, snuffed out like a candle flame. I've had enough of this, Gojo said quietly. Everyone needs to leave. Now. What happened next was difficult to describe. The air in the chamber changed, became heavier, more present. Gojo didn't cast a spell, didn't speak an incantation. He simply decided that the students needed to not be here anymore, and reality bent itself to accommodate. Space contracted. The students found themselves pulled backward toward the exit by a force that was gentle but irresistible. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. Ron grabbed his other. Together they stumbled through the doorway back into the corridor beyond. The Order followed, carrying their wounded. Tonks was unconscious but breathing. Moody limped, supported by Kingsley. Remus came last, his face ravaged with grief. Behind them in the death chamber, Dumbledore and Voldemort continued their duel. Gojo remained between them and the students, a barrier made flesh. The corridor twisted. The department's magic activated, sealing the chamber, isolating the battle from the rest of the building. Standard protocol for this kind of threat: contain first, resolve second. Harry fought against Hermione and Ron's grip. We can't just leave. We have to. Hermione's voice broke. Harry, we have to go. They ran through corridors that seemed to shift and change through the circular room where doors spun in dizzying succession, through passages that grew progressively warmer as they climbed toward the surface. Behind them, the department trembled with the force of magic being used in ways it was never designed to handle. They burst into the atrium. Empty. Silent. The fountain's water still and dark. Harry collapsed against a wall legs, giving out everything, giving out. Sirius was gone. Dead, fallen through a doorway Gojo couldn't breach into a place Harry couldn't follow. And it was Harry's fault. His vision, his decision, his desperate need to save someone who hadn't needed saving. Hermione sat beside him, saying nothing. Ron hovered nearby, useless, and trying anyway. The other students gathered in a tight group processing trauma in the way children do, silently, internally, storing it away to unpack later. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time felt meaningless. The lifts activated. Gojo emerged first alone, his clothing torn in places Harry didn't remember seeing damaged. He looked tired. Properly tired, not the theatrical exhaustion he sometimes performed. Then Dumbledore appeared, leaning heavily on his wand, older than Harry had ever seen him look. Voldemort didn't follow. The battle was over, though who had won was unclear. Dumbledore's eyes found Harry across the atrium. They held sorrow and understanding and something that might have been apology. I'm sorry, Harry, the headmaster said softly. I am so deeply sorry. Harry said nothing. There were no words. Sirius was gone and sorry couldn't bring him back. Gojo approached, slowly stopped a few feet away. I tried, he said. For what it's worth, I tried everything I knew. It's not worth anything. Harry's voice came out flat. He's still dead? Yes. Gojo didn't look away, didn't soften the truth. He is. The Aurors arrived then, flooding the atrium with shouted questions and drawn wands. Dumbledore moved to intercept them, already crafting explanations, already managing the political fallout. Gojo stayed with the students, a silent presence that asked nothing and offered nothing except the reality of still being alive. When someone they loved was not. Harry stared at the fountain and tried to remember how to breathe. The prophecy orb in his pocket was cracked. He could feel the pieces shifting when he moved, broken like everything else. Above them, London continued its night, unaware, uncaring. The world kept spinning while Harry's had stopped. Sirius Black was dead. And nothing, not Gojo's power, not Dumbledore's magic, not Harry's desperate hope had been enough to prevent it. The hospital wing smelled of clean linen and potions that couldn't fix what was actually broken. Harry sat on a bed he didn't need, staring at nothing, while Madame Pomfrey fussed over students who'd actually been hurt. Hermione had a gash along her arm that required 17 stitches worth of healing charms. Ron's ribs were cracked. Neville couldn't stop his hands from shaking. Harry was physically fine. Madame Pomfrey had checked anyway, tutting about shock and trauma, as if those were things that could be mended with a wand and good intentions. The sun rose outside the windows. Morning came, whether anyone wanted it or not. Students would wake soon, go to breakfast, attend classes, live their lives in blissful ignorance of what had happened in the Department of Mysteries. For them, yesterday was just another Tuesday. For Harry, yesterday was the day his godfather died. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway. He looked ancient in the early light centuries of burden visible in the set of his shoulders. Harry, may I speak with you? Harry said nothing. Didn't nod, didn't refuse. Just stood and followed because sitting still was becoming unbearable, and at least walking gave his body something to do. They went to Dumbledore's office. The gargoyle moved aside without a password. The spiral staircase rose in silence. Portraits of former headmasters pretended to sleep, but Harry could feel them watching. Dumbledore's office was exactly as Harry remembered, cluttered with instruments that whirred and clicked, walls lined with books, Fawkes dozing on his perch. It felt surreal, this normalcy, as if the world should have changed fundamentally to match the hole Sirius's death had torn in it. Sit, please, Dumbledore said gently. Harry sat. The chair was comfortable. He hated it. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore began. Several, in fact. But first, I must tell you something about Lord Voldemort that very few people know. Harry's hand moved to his pocket, finding the cracked prophecy orb. Does it matter Sirius is still dead? It matters because understanding what we face is the only way to prevent more deaths. Dumbledore settled behind his desk, suddenly looking every one of his 100+ years. Tom Riddle has done something unconscionable. He has split his soul. The words hung in the air like a curse. Horcruxes, Dumbledore continued. Objects in which a wizard has concealed a fragment of his soul, anchoring himself to the mortal plane. As long as even one horcrux remains, the person cannot truly die. Harry's throat felt tight. How many? I believe 6 originally. Though one has already been destroyed, the diary that possessed Ginny Weasley 2 years ago. 6 pieces of soul. 6 objects hiding somewhere in the world. It explained why Voldemort had survived the killing curse. Why he'd come back. Why killing him seemed impossible. Can they be destroyed? Harry asked. Yes, but not easily. Horcruxes are protected by powerful magic. They must be damaged beyond magical repair. Basilisk, venom, fiend fire, certain ancient artifacts. Dumbledore paused. Brute force alone will not suffice. The magic involved transcends simple physical destruction. A knock at the door interrupted them. Gojo entered without waiting for permission, looking like he hadn't slept. His usual casual demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more focused. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Dumbledore gestured to a chair. "Please join us. This concerns you as well." Gojo sat, but his attention was fixed on Dumbledore. "You said horcruxes can't be destroyed by brute force. I want to test that. I'm not sure that's wise. I need to understand the rules here." Gojo's voice carried an edge Harry had never heard before. "I failed at the veil because I didn't understand what I was dealing with. I'm not making that mistake twice." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then he stood crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a small, ornate box. Inside sat a ring, ugly old with a cracked black stone set in gold. "This is the Peveril ring," Dumbledore said. "It contains a fragment of Voldemort's soul. I recovered it some months ago, but have not yet destroyed it, as I've been researching the safest method." He set the box on his desk. "The horcrux will defend itself. Be cautious." Gojo approached the desk slowly. His hand didn't quite touch the box, hovering an inch above it. Harry could feel something change in the room, a pressure, a weight, as if reality was holding its breath. "It's trying to hide," Gojo said quietly, "making itself seem less important than it is. Whispering that I should look away, that it doesn't matter." His head tilted. "Clever." He picked up the ring. The moment his fingers made contact, the ring screamed. Not audibly. The sound existed somewhere between hearing and feeling, a shriek of rage and hunger that made Harry's scar explode with pain. The ring writhed in Gojo's grip, trying to force itself onto his finger, to bind itself to him. Gojo's other hand came up. Blue light flickered around the ring. The attraction technique pulling the ring toward a single point, crushing it with invisible force. The gold band bent, twisted. The stone cracked further, then stopped. No matter how much force Gojo applied, the ring refused to break completely. The magic inside it pushed back, not with strength, but with wrongness, with a fundamental assertion that it should not be destroyed because pieces of souls were meant to persist. Sweat beaded on Gojo's forehead. The blue light intensified. The ring shrieked louder. "Enough," Dumbledore said firmly. Gojo released the ring. It clattered onto the desk, bent but unbroken, still very much a horcrux. "I could phase it out of existence," Gojo said, breathing harder than the effort should have required. "Erase the space it occupies. But the fragment inside..." He trailed off, staring at the ring, with something that might have been frustration or might have been respect. "It's not fully in this world. Part of it exists somewhere else, somewhere I can't reach. The soul exists beyond physical space," Dumbledore said gently. "It is the one thing that transcends even death. You can destroy the vessel, but the fragment within requires something that operates on the same level magic that touches the soul directly." Gojo picked up the ring again, more carefully this time. His 6 eyes, whatever power let him see beyond normal sight, examined it from every angle. "This is different from the veil. The veil is a threshold. This is..." He paused, searching for words. "This is a knot." A piece of existence tied to itself in a way that shouldn't be possible. Precisely. Dumbledore retrieved the ring and returned it to its box. Tom Riddle has violated the natural order. His horcruxes exist in defiance of how reality should function. They can be unmade, but only by methods that acknowledge their nature. Gojo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. So you're telling me that in this world, intent matters more than force? In many ways, yes. Magic here is as much about will and understanding as it is about power. And the veil has stood in that chamber for longer than recorded history. It is not a creation of magic, but a place where magic fails, where existence itself thins to nothing. You could no more pull someone back from beyond it than you could catch smoke with your bare hands. The silence that followed felt heavy. Harry watched Gojo process this, watched him accept limitations he'd probably never encountered before. "I hate this," Gojo said finally. "I hate that there are rules I don't get to break." "We all do," Dumbledore replied. "But accepting those rules is what allows us to work within them, effectively." Gojo stood, moved to the window, stared out at the grounds where students were beginning to emerge for their morning routines. "So what's my role here if I can't destroy the horcruxes, if I can't breach the veil? What am I actually useful for?" Dumbledore's expression softened. "You can do what very few others can: protect those who would destroy the horcruxes. Shield them from threats, while they do the work only they can do. Be the barrier between Voldemort's forces and the children who must unfairly carry this burden." "A bodyguard." Gojo's tone was flat. "A shield," Dumbledore corrected. "There is no shame in it. Harry will hunt the horcruxes. You will ensure he lives long enough to do so." Harry finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse. "I don't need a shield." Both men turned to look at him. Gojo's expression was unreadable behind the blindfold. Dumbledore's was infinitely sad. "Yes, Harry, you do," the headmaster said gently. "I have asked too much of you already. I will not compound that error by sending you into danger alone." Sirius died because Tom Riddle laid a trap and we all walked into it." Dumbledore's voice was firm. "His death is not your burden to carry, though I know you will carry it anyway. But you must understand, this war will demand sacrifices. We cannot prevent all of them. We can only ensure they mean something." The words should have been comforting. They weren't. Nothing was. Gojo turned from the window. "I'll do it. Not because I like it, but because watching kids die isn't my idea of a good time." He looked at Harry. "You're going to do something stupid again. Probably soon. When you do, I'll be there. Not to stop you, just to make sure the stupid thing doesn't kill you." It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact delivered without warmth or theatricality. Somehow that made it more reassuring than any oath could have been. "There is one more thing," Dumbledore said. He drew his wand and touched it to the damaged ring. "Fiend fire, when properly controlled, can destroy a horcrux. But it is dangerous, as likely to consume the caster as the target. Basilisk venom is safer, but rare. The sword of Gryffindor, having absorbed basilisk venom, is one of the few weapons that can reliably destroy these objects." He opened a cabinet. The sword gleamed inside silver and rubies, beautiful and deadly. "This will be your primary tool, Harry. When the time comes to destroy the horcruxes we find." Harry stared at the sword. It was just metal. Just a weapon. But in this world of impossible rules and souls, split into pieces, maybe that was enough. "When do we start?" he asked. "Soon, but not today." Dumbledore closed the cabinet. "Today you grieve. Tomorrow we plan. The days after we act." Gojo moved toward the door. "I'm going to talk to the other students. Make sure they're processing this in ways that won't destroy them." He left without waiting for dismissal. The door closed softly behind him. Dumbledore regarded Harry across his desk. "I failed you, Harry. I kept information from you that might have prevented last night's tragedy. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you ignorant. I was wrong." "You were," Harry agreed. His voice was hollow. "I will not make that mistake again. From this moment forward, you will know everything I know about Tom Riddle's horcruxes. Everything about the prophecy that binds you to him. Everything." The prophecy. Harry had almost forgotten about it in the chaos. He pulled the broken orb from his pocket. Pieces of glass and something that might have been mist leaked between his fingers. "It broke," he said unnecessarily. "The prophecy was made to me personally," Dumbledore said. "I can tell you what it contained if you wish to know." Harry thought about it. About destiny and fate and the weight of knowing your future was already written. "Later," he said. "Not today." Dumbledore nodded. "When you're ready." Harry stood. His legs felt shaky but held. "I should get back to the hospital wing. Hermione will worry if I'm gone too long." "Harry," Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. "Sirius loved you. His last thoughts were of protecting you. That love doesn't end just because he has." Harry's throat closed. He managed a nod and left before the tears could start. The corridor outside was empty. Morning light streamed through windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted without purpose. Somewhere below, the school was waking up, going through motions, pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Harry leaned against the wall and finally let himself break. He cried silently, shoulders shaking until there was nothing left. Then he straightened, wiped his face, and walked back toward the hospital wing where his friends waited. Sirius was gone. The horcruxes remained. The war continued. And Harry Potter, who'd wanted nothing more than a normal life, had a sword to wield and fragments of a soul to hunt. Tomorrow the work would begin. Today, he grieved.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.